last question. Uh, in fact, it's a two-part question. The first part is, what opportunities do you see now and for the future for the next generation?
Mhm.
As well as this, if you could not leave anything to your children except wisdom and a set of principles, what would that be?
Yeah. So, Alex, yeah, you throw some heavy ones out there. So, I do feel like the next generation of leaders, community leaders, business leaders, political leaders, I do feel like this sense of apathy is sort of dissipating. So one thing that I've kind of believed is that, people just don't care anymore, right? They don't care about anything. They don't pay attention to what's going on. They don't care. And, not to get political, but, the last 4 years is an example of that. Actually, the last 6 years, on how we ended up with the president that we ended up. To me, that's a perfect example of apathy. Like, values. What's that value legacy that I would leave to my children? I do believe in philanthropy, and I do believe that what I want to leave my children with is the sense that of a sense of responsibility to community, whatever that community is.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Alex with the Black Culture Podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Black Culture Podcast.
Mr. Ronald Johnson.
Well, hello, everyone. And just got to say, I'm real excited to be on this podcast. I've gotten a chance to get to know Willie and Alex, over the past several weeks. And I like the podcast. I like the concept. I like what you guys are doing. And
Thank you.
I'm just
Thank you
glad to
very
be able to
much.
here to contribute in whatever way that I can. So thanks for inviting me to participate. And hopefully the listeners will get something out of our discussion today.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you for
And-
taking your time. Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, what we do, man. Before we get started, let's toast it up.
The tradition. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
There we go.
All right. So as always, we love to start the podcast off to get to know our guests. We want our viewers to get to know who you are. So please, the floor is yours. Tell us, who is Ron Johnson?
All right. So that's always a tough question to answer because, do we ever really know who we are anyway? And sometimes that changes, but here goes. So I was born in New York, in Brooklyn. My mom and her family are from New York. My father's from Cleveland, and so I have a lot of family there. I visit there frequently, so that's where I was born. But I grew up here in the Cleveland area. All my schooling here, college is Northeast Ohio, higher education all here in Northeast Ohio. So even though I claim some New York elements, I'm a Clevelander. As you mentioned, I work for Keybank. I've been at the bank for over 20 years now, but I've worked other places around town. And who I am really is just a person who tries to help people out where I can to contribute to the betterment of my community. I try to share what I know with anyone who has an interest in learning, whether it's about career, whether it's about community, or anything that that I can offer a solution to. I love Cleveland. I talk about Cleveland all the time. I try to get people to move to Cleveland. I try to convince people not to move away from Cleveland. I try to be involved in a lot of different things because Cleveland is, I think, it's a great town, great city. There's a lot to offer, and for many people who are new to Cleveland, You know, they might have heard about Cleveland. You know, maybe they heard a joke or two about Cleveland. Maybe they watch, you know, our sports teams over the years and have something to, you know, something funny to say about Cleveland. But once people get to Cleveland, they really realize this is like this is a really nice place. And so I just try to do what I can to make Cleveland a better place to the extent possible. So um, that's who I am.
Ron Johnson for mayor. That's all I
Yes,
have to
sir.
say. So you said you're originally from New York and then you moved to Cleveland. About how old were you when you moved here?
So when I was young, the first time we moved, we kind of moved back and forth between Cleveland and New York for a few years. So I was probably about 7
Okay.
when we first moved, and then was here for a couple of years, moved back to New York for a couple of years, and then came back and ultimately settled here in Cleveland.
So tell our audience a little bit, because me and Willie are both from Cleveland as well. What area you grew up in, and what was the time like back then, from the social climate, the political climate, and just kind of the overall, how it was for you, how it was for your family.
Okay. So I grew up in the Shaker Square area. When we first moved to Cleveland, we actually lived in the projects down on 55th in Outhwaite. And the first school that I went to was Alfred A. Benish, right on 55th. That's where my father, his kind of grew up in the projects, and we stayed with his grandmother for a little while. When we finally settled here in Cleveland, we ended up moving out to the Shaker Square area, 140th and Milverton.
Yep, I know what
And
that is.
yep, and so we were actually on the border of Cleveland and Shaker. We were actually in the Shaker School District, even though we lived in Cleveland. And so I ended up going to Ludlow Elementary School in Shaker. And then ultimately we moved on the other side of Shaker Square, still in Cleveland, but within the Shaker School District. And that's what I did. I ended up going through the Shaker High School District and graduated in 1988, about 1,000 years ago. As far as the social climate, it was interesting. When we first moved to the 140th and Milverton, my parents bought the house from a guy who was of Eastern European background, because back then, or back in I want to say maybe the 40s and 50s, that part of Buckeye and 140th Street, there were a lot of Eastern Europeans there. And so the gentleman that my parents purchased a home from, he came, I think his family was like Slovenian or something like that. And there were, a number of Black families that were moving into the neighborhood. 140th Street at that time was pretty diverse. Pretty diverse section, between Black and white. I think now probably predominantly Black. And I think that was probably true, in the 70s, in the 80s, when a lot of Blacks started really moving into Shaker Heights, into that part of Cleveland, probably to take advantage of the ability to get into the Shaker Heights school system. When we moved from that side, from the south side of Shaker Square to the north side of Shaker Square, we moved into a neighborhood that was diverse, but wasn't as diverse. And it was actually a street where there were a lot of local, local city officials that had to meet residency requirements. So they had to live in the city of Cleveland, and but they wanted to, send their children to the Shaker school system. And so the area that I lived in, that we lived in at that time, we had a former mayor who was our neighbor. We had a chief inspector from the Cleveland Police Department that was our neighbor. We had, judges, that were neighbors and things of that nature. And so it was kind of an interesting environment. And it was actually a pretty close-knit neighborhood because on holidays, they would actually block the streets off. So like Memorial Day, they blocked the street off for through traffic, and then they have like little block parties and stuff like that. So it was kind of interesting growing up in that environment.
It's funny that you bring up the Shaker school system. I grew up on Harvard, so I remember my friends would say, the thing was back then was if you lived in Cleveland or the Harvard area, you wanted to get your kids into the Shaker school system, or you would try to get them. So it's funny you say it was like that back then. Like it's still like that now, because obviously, you want to get your children into out of the public school area. So, but it was hard. Like you said, you had to make sure you had to show that you lived there. You had to have the address, maybe even a number that showed it. So I thought that was just a thing that went on now. Like, so to hear that went on back then is crazy. Cause I remember even the people that play basketball, they would get like if you had a aunt or uncle that lived in Garfield, you would try to get their number because you wanted to go to Garfield because it was a better opportunity to get looked at.
Right.
Because no one really came to the public schools to look at kids unless they were like really. So you would try elite, right? Like unless it was Glenville, but even Glenville, I think it was just football. But if you were like running track or something else, you literally had to be at Garfield or any of the high school to actually. And you talk about good football players, and it was a different. I think in most, like in Garfield, to play sports, you have to pay. In public
is that
school,
right? Yeah, I didn't know that.
Well, that's how it was when I was in school. That was in 2010. I don't know if it's changed, but you had to like have like it was fees you had to pay to be on the team. So
wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it was like now, of course, you have the 5-star athletes. Rules are different for everyone. But man, just to hear you say that you had to. People were doing that back then that is amazing to me.
Yeah. Now I will say, and it's kind of a double-edged sword. And so I'll say a couple of things, and I don't want to disparage the Shaker school system, but there were a couple of lessons that I learned, going through that school system, at that time, and part of those lessons I think have helped shape just my approach and the things that I focus on today.
Can you elaborate? If
absolutely.
Okay.
So, and these are things that my in talking to my mother, she really helped me understand how to deal with school systems, especially when I had children of my own and kind of dealing with the school systems. So I'll go ahead and elaborate. So the first thing I'll say is this: I was not a very good student up until I got to high school. So I just wasn't a good student. I didn't do my homework.
I was gonna say, you mean like attitude wise or academic wise?
It was probably a little bit of both. I mean, I wasn't.
Okay.
I didn't act up in class, but I didn't follow through on things. I was probably a lazy student. I think I frustrated some of my teachers. And there were two teachers that I really, really frustrated. And they actually developed a relationship with my mother, and they were Black women, Black teachers. And I didn't realize it then because I was a child, but I realize it now. The reason why they were so frustrated is because they had this thing in the Shaker school system that was, this dual track system for its students. So they actually had 3 different tracks. They had a remedial track for the students who struggle with certain basic academic things. You struggle with math or reading, writing, stuff like that. and you weren't reading or you weren't performing at the level, the grade level that they expected you to, there was this remedial track. Then they had the regular track, which is like the college prep track. And I'm really thinking more specifically about, junior high to high school. And then they had the advanced classes, right? So I remember in elementary school, the teacher that I did not like the most was an older Black woman, and she was a tough teacher. She was hard on me. I mean, she really made me work, and I did not like that. Okay. And then there was the teacher that I liked the best was a teacher who probably doted on me a little bit, was very easygoing. If I didn't, do my work, then, it was no big deal. And my mother could not stand this teacher. And she couldn't stand this teacher because she said, this teacher did not challenge me as a student. And what I learned in not all of the teachers, but in some of my experiences, the teachers who let me slide are the ones who didn't challenge me, because what my mother said is, you're not a dumb student, you're just a lazy one, and you need to be challenged. You need somebody to really push you so you can achieve and do the things that you need to do. And so the teachers that I didn't like are the ones that try to do that, because they probably saw potential in me that I
Yep.
didn't see. But being a child, I didn't really fully understand that. And so what happened is, so I got through elementary school and then I went to junior high. And junior high is, to me, is when kids really need to figure out how to be successful. When you're in elementary school, I mean, you're in elementary school, but junior high, you begin to really, for many people, you begin to realize who you are. And so, because that's when you start changing, you're rotating classes and you're involved in different activities, and so the way you interact is a little bit different. So what happened was, my mother, she wanted me uh, to be in these advanced level classes, and she fought tooth and nail with the administration. They told her, he's not really ready, he's not a good student, maybe he doesn't have the aptitude. They were trying to keep me in this remedial track. And it turns out that if you were to look at the makeup back then, a lot of the Black and Brown students tended to be in the remedial track. And then when it came to the advanced classes, that's when you would begin to see some disparities. So even though, we kind of started the conversation off of, people wanting to have their kids go into the school system, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, yes, on a surface, the school system might have seemed like it had to offer, but then you had to kind of deal with those nuances and those politics, inside the school system. And I thank God for my mom for being diligent, because, many parents don't either know how to advocate for their children in schools, or they don't have time, or whatever. I mean, they're kind of relying on the school to provide that guidance. But my mom said, no, you have to know your child, you have to know your children, you have to know their strengths, and you have to be vigilant. And so that was a lesson that I learned, and these were, and she gave me examples. Like when I was an adult and we were having these conversations, she gave me examples. She said, remember when you did this and you did that? Yeah, I remember that. And you remember how you were upset and you really loved this thing? And then she would explain it to me. And I was like, wow, I had no idea that she was dealing with these kinds of things. And so, as an adult now, I began to realize that there's always, more happening below the surface. And so that's why now, when when I'm engaged in different things, I understand that what you see on the surface doesn't necessarily tell the entire story.
Wow.
Now that's a mouthful. First of all,
Yeah, I'll
thank,
pause. I
thank.
know.
No, that was
No,
awesome.
no,
Please do not
no, no,
apologize.
no, no. That was great, and it's funny how when we do get older, we look back on our childhood and say, if I could go back and do it again, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like you realize that my parents were trying to tell me what to do right, but us being young and not knowing, thinking that we know everything, they must be wrong, and we don't see it until we get older.
You feel like they're just being mean.
Right, exactly. And so I've got two things. First thing, I've been waiting to say this. I went to Heights, and I grew up in Cleveland Heights, so Shaker was our rival.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to put that out there.
I understand. My best friends graduated from Heights, and we talk that mess all the time. And I don't hold it
Uh-huh.
against them. They still good people. You can't
Right,
help
right.
you can't help where you went to school, man. You can't help it.
Same thing I say to you, you know. But you know, I find it, after you tell that story, I find it really interesting because you grew up kind of in a unique position where you actually grew up on the street with high achievers and leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to see that firsthand. So the disparity of you at that time not being a high achiever in school, but growing up around all these high achievers, how do you think that affected you later in life as you begin to reflect back on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because when I think about the kids that I went to school with, even the kids who were not Black, affluent kids, um, who had privilege. And, even though I didn't grow up in that environment, I grew up around those folks. We didn't have privilege, right? We didn't have the same resources that were available. I began to realize that, um, there's a presumption that privilege breeds intellect, um, but it's just a presumption. And what I found is, um, growing up around those individuals, you really begin to appreciate what privilege really can offer. So some examples are, um, uh, that sometimes when we're around people that we think have privilege or are affluent, um, I don't know if it's probably not overt, but for some people, we begin to feel like, maybe we don't really measure up. But when you talk to these folks, you realize they're really not that much smarter, right? In many cases, they're not as smart at all, right? They lack, um, perspective about things. And
Mm.
so what you actually learn to do is when you're a person of color growing up in that environment, you have to kind of play this game, because on the one hand, you want to you want to try to battle this feeling of inferiority. You're fighting that because deep down inside that doesn't really exist, but you kind of respect these social norms. Um, and so, but then being a Black person dealing with this, you're like, you know what? How can I overcome this? How can I overcome this? And if I have a conversation with someone who comes from a certain background, they sometimes they say some really, really ignorant things, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to figure out, how do you deal with that? You can't come at everything head on, and sometimes you try to educate people, and sometimes you don't. But what I learned from it, what I took away from it is that, um, I have to know myself. I have to know what my abilities are. I have to know what my aptitudes are, and then I have to figure out, how to achieve. And so sometimes you just sit back and you observe, and then you learn how things get done. Just because you get the best grades in class, or you raise your hand in class and answer the question, doesn't always mean you're going to get the best grade in class, right? There's a certain politics to it. What I learned is you have to develop a relationship with the teacher, right? Your teacher has to get to know you, because what I've learned is if your teacher knows you, they have a relationship, you actually get the benefit of the doubt. So yeah, you might have missed an assignment, or you might be a little bit late, but they know you.
So
So
you
they know
learned to network at a young age, pretty much.
you learn to network. You learn the
Nice.
value of relationships. You learn that, that uh, hardcore performance gets you to a certain point, but that's not the end all be all. And a lot of times, like even in career, what we battle is, we do the job, we do it well, but we still don't achieve. We still don't get ahead. We still get passed over for promotions. We still, all these other things, because we think our performance should speak for itself, but it doesn't.
So,
There's more to the story.
So did you grow up under that mindset that you have to be twice as good in any way?
Absolutely, because the excuses are this: if you if your counterpart gets a B and you get the C, then that becomes the excuse. Well, you got the lower grade. But if you get an A and your counterpart gets a B, well then, and your counterpart is still achieving, then how do you explain that gap? And so I kind of grew up with the mindset that I never want the grade to be the excuse. That means I have to be able to hit the ball out the park, because that's not going to be the excuse. If you tell me I get passed over for an opportunity, you're not going to be able to use the excuse, well, it's performance based, because it's not performance based, because my performance speaks for itself. So now what's the real story?
That's powerful.
And so that's something that we have to learn. And that's just navigating. And I learned that in high school. I learned that in college, reinforced that in college. And then, and then I kind of observed that, on the job in a general sense.
So let's start there. You graduate high school. What was your plan then? What did you do? What did you like? Did you know what you wanted your career to be after you graduated? Did you already have a plan?
So I had a plan, or let me put it this way: I had a vision.
Okay.
But I didn't have a plan. So, and this is where I say I was kind of a late bloomer in this regard. What I wanted to do was I wanted to go to Florida A&M.
Okay.
Okay.
HBCU.
I wanted to go to an HBCU. I wanted to get a business degree, and Florida A&M has a 5-year program where you can actually get your undergraduate degree and get a master, an MBA in that 5-year period. I learned about that, and that's what I wanted to do. At least that's what I said that I wanted to do. But I didn't apply on time. I didn't do all the things that, students need to do to prepare. And so when I graduated high school, I actually did not have a college acceptance because I was lazy. I just didn't do it. And it wasn't for lack of, parents' lack of trying. I mean, they told me I needed to do it. My counselors told me I needed to do it, but I just wasn't focused on it.
Did you feel like that went back to your background earlier when you said you felt like you wasn't a good student?
I think so. I mean, I don't
Okay.
know. I think so. And the reason why I say that now in hindsight is because I have 3 children. I have triplets. They're
Wow.
18, 3 different personalities, and one of my sons is exactly like me. He was not a good student. He was a lazy student. He was smart, right? He picks up on things. He's smart, but you couldn't get him to do his homework for nothing. And so now he's enrolled at Kent State, and he's actually a pretty diligent student in college, but he wasn't like that before. And so I figured that's probably just who I am. So I ended up going to Cleveland State, and I didn't have money to go to Cleveland State, so I had to work and work and pay my tuition. I went part-time, and it took me 7 years to get my undergraduate degree. But I did it. I figured it out. I didn't have parents pay my tuition. I didn't have scholarships. And so I found a way to get it done. And when hindsight being 2020, I mean, my timeline was a bit off. I wish I could have done it sooner, but sometimes the process is better than the time frame. And to me, that's what really helped. And what I learned, to answer the question about planning, is that's when I really learned that if I want to do certain things, I have to find a way to get it done, and I have to map it out. And it's not going to happen just by accident. It's got to be purposeful. And so that's all kind of helped shape my approach to things today.
How was that?
Yeah, I would just ask this real quick. It was funny. I find that usually when you find students who are a late bloomer, maybe they weren't as interested in school. It's due to the fact that those are usually people born of passion.
Hmm.
So unless it's a necessity and I have to do it now, they'll usually be procrastinators, lazy until they find something that they're passionate about. Then now I'm all in, and they
Hmm.
become super high achievers. You wouldn't believe how many billionaires, politicians, judges, doctors, all of them at some point they had to find something that they were passionate about. And so my question to you is, back then you knew you weren't like engaged in school the way you should be, as you
Hmm.
as you look back at it now, but what were you passionate about, or what as you look back do you think you were
Yeah.
something that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah. So had evolved. So before college, this might surprise you. It surprises a lot of people. I was actually a poet and a musician, right? I played keyboards. We started taking piano lessons when I was in, third grade. I played saxophone. I had a nice little, little jazz, informal jazz band and all that stuff. And I thought I might be a musician or something like that. And then, but both my parents were in banking. People that, you know, adults that I knew, they were all in business. So then I had this thought that, well, I'll get a degree in business and I'll, become a stockbroker on Wall Street. And then I remember watching a movie or something, and I said, you know what? I think I like this law thing, and I think I want to become a lawyer. And so everything kind of evolved, and was different. And so, I haven't written a poem, and I haven't picked up a saxophone or touched the keyboard in so long. And so, you know, that's when I realized I didn't know who I was, because when you're growing up and you're around all these influences, sometimes it's hard to differentiate between, you know, what you really want to do and what you think people want you to do, and what you hear and stuff like that. And I think this is true with my son that I was describing to you. Um, he went on campus at Kent State despite, the pandemic and all that stuff. But he needed to do that because he needed to be away, and to kind of really figure out like himself and what he wants to do and how he wants to get it done. And I think for me, that's probably what happened. Is once I graduated and I went to college, and my parents got divorced, and it was a rough time, but it was also a time for me to finally jump out the nest, spread my wings, and fly. And I bumped into some trees, but I did get in the air eventually. And so sometimes that's what we need to do.
Mm.
Okay, so I wanna, because before we switch segues, Alex is gonna go, because you brought up banking, and Alex is gonna go into that one. But before we get into that, you said you did 7 years in college and you worked.
Yes.
Could you? Because was there a moment where you felt like giving up in that time where it got hard? Like, how was that mentally, trying to go to
Yeah.
school, go to class, and still work? Explain that to our viewers.
So it was hard. So I joined a fraternity. Um, my friends, we wanted to have fun. We were young. We wanted to go out and party. We wanted to have fun. We wanted to do some things.
The college life.
Of
The
course.
college, yeah, we wanted to enjoy the college life. Nothing wrong with that.
And what
Um,
what school was this you went to?
I went to Cleveland State.
Cleveland State.
I
Okay.
was at Cleveland State, and
Vikings.
yep, Vikings. And so I had to balance that, and I mean, I had my moments, but at the end of the day, I knew that I needed to finish I need to finish and get my degree, and I was pursuing a degree in finance. So I learned to prioritize, quite frankly. Um, and there were a couple of times. There was one quarter. We were on quarters then, not semesters. There was one quarter I didn't go to school that quarter because I just didn't have tuition money, and I was working, and I was thinking, well, maybe I'll do a gap year, right? We've heard that term before. Um, but at the end of the day, the little money that I was making doing the job that I was doing, once you stop going, then it actually becomes harder to finish. And I know plenty of people who've done that.
Yep.
And some people, you have to do it. They do it by necessity. Something happens, they have a sick family member, or sometimes they have, children or whatever. Something happens and they have to stop. And I get that. But the longer you stop, the harder it actually is to get back into it. And so I just said, you know what, I'm gonna get it done. But the way I got it done was I was working at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, and they actually had a tuition reimbursement program. And so if you were a full-time employee, you could actually participate in that program. And so that's actually what kind of helped me get through it, because I was working, my employer was, you weren't, it was their discretion if I could participate in it, and they let me do it. So I wasn't not going to finish. And then once I finished, then I actually, went on to the next thing and went and got an MBA. And so that's how I, completed my education.
Now, during this time, are you married? Are you a dad yet, or are you still kind of?
So I'm single. I'm not married. I'm unattached. And so I might have been in, it might have been a semi-serious relationship, but I had capacity. And to me, that's actually a really important point to make, because sometimes when we have entanglements or attachments, that can complicate things as well. And so
entanglements. we've recently gotten familiar with that term.
Yeah, so you can define the word however whatever works for you, but I think for some of us, out there, it's a word that's appropriate to those situations. But it's one of those things where if I was married, if I had children, it really would have been more challenging. And so I was fortunate that I didn't have those things holding me back, and I was able to to finish. That was undergraduate. By the time I finished my MBA, I was married but didn't have children. When I went to law school, my children were born right in the middle of law school. So I was 50% completed with law school. The kids were born, and then quite frankly, I had to do that calculus because we had triplets, and that was no joke. And so I actually thought about dropping out, but fortunately, I was able to continue. And I give my my ex-wife credit for saying, nope, go ahead and finish, do your thing, because if you stop now, it's going to be hard for you to get back to it. And so there's no easy way of doing it, but it can be done. So for the people out there that are listening and you're thinking about, can I finish my education? Can I pursue a degree? Absolutely, you can. Thousands of people do it every day. So it can be done. Our individual circumstances, we have to kind of learn how to maneuver those circumstances. But if it's something that you really, really want to do, you're going to find a way to do it.
I want to real quick, Alex, because that point right there, I really want to piggyback off of, because definitely there's this stereotype and this image that if you're not doing anything by a certain age or by 25, it's like you behind. So many times people get discouraged, like, man, I'm 20, I'm 30 years old. I haven't, no, like, I feel like there's never too late to start your dream or your goal. So hearing you say that, I just wanted to make sure that I highlight that comment, because I even had a moment, my wife and I talked about it, where we was like, you're under this impression that if you don't start a career by 25, you're behind, you're failing in life, and that's not true. It's people that wake up at 45, at 50, it's like, you know what, I want to start a new career. So I just wanted to make sure for our audience and our young viewers out there that I highlight that comment.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, uh, with the advent of social media, we're seeing people in their 40s,
Yeah.
50s, 60s, 70s earning their degrees,
Yes.
going back to
It's
school,
never too
earning their
late.
degrees. I remember I saw a picture, I think it was on LinkedIn, maybe last week or the week before, where you saw a mother and her son, they graduated together. They both walked across that stage together. But I want to get back into your time at the Federal Reserve. And it's a two-part question. The first part is, what was your experience there? And what when you said you were a single guy, what was the reaction when you told the young ladies, I work at the Federal Reserve?
Well,
Means I got control of all the money in your bank account.
well, I'll tell you what. So getting a job at the Fed is not an easy thing. Even today, I was fortunate because when I was at Cleveland State, I had a mentor. I was in this program that's still around, by the way, at Cleveland State. It's called the Link program, LINK. And I had a mentor who was, at the time, he was the highest ranking African American at the Federal Reserve.
Wow.
So he became my mentor through this program. Really nice guy. And he was old school. He was one of those old school uncles. He told you how it is directly. He didn't sugarcoat anything. And I was looking for a summer job, and he told me, he said, I can get you an interview, but I can't get you the job. So go ahead and interview, and don't embarrass me. I mean, that was pretty much, probably almost verbatim what he told me. And so I got that job over the summer, and then a part-time position had opened up. And so I was able to slide into that position. And I needed that. I needed that role. What was interesting, so my experience at the Fed was actually really good. I actually ended up having another person, white male, who had a reputation. The people either loved him or hated him, and more people hated him than loved him. He was a rough leader, but for some reason, I don't know what it was. Some reason we clicked, and he became an advocate for me. And so, as a consequence, my first job as a manager or as a supervisor manager, I was working in this area. I was probably in there for maybe a little more than a year. I was in my 20s, and all the people that I worked with ended up reporting to me, and some of those folks had been at the bank for 15, 20 years, and that was rough duty. They liked me as a person, but the idea of
Who is this young
who is this
guy?
young guy?
Who do you think he is?
He don't even know the job, right? I mean, he hasn't been here long enough. They were the experts, and now I gotta answer to him. I learned some valuable things in that role, but the point is that I didn't apply for that job. It was given to me, and it was an opportunity for me to grow and do that job. And then I did that job and did it well, and ultimately my team came to respect me because I wasn't that boss. Like, I wasn't that guy. I knew my deficiencies, and I knew how to deal with them. But then my next opportunity was, again, they tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, here's something that's coming up. We want you to do this. And so I did that for 10 years at the Fed. and it was a great experience. But I recognize that that doesn't happen all the time, and sometimes that can breed some resentment, from people along the way. And I'll never forget my last job at the Fed before I moved over to Key. I ran this operations area that had two shifts. It had a day shift and a night shift. And I ran the day shift, and my counterpart ran the night shift. And my counterpart had a reputation for, quite frankly, he was kind of racist, and he was one of those old school guys who kind of grew up to become a manager. And by that time, I had my undergraduate degree and I had my master's degree. And I remember, got in my office and I, just proud of myself. And I hung my degrees on the wall in my office because, I was proud. I wasn't lording it over anybody. I mean, I wasn't walking around with a chip on my shoulder. And I remember he came into my office and we were kind of chit-chatting, and he kind of looked at the wall and he made this comment. I'll never forget it. He said, sometimes, they people that go to school and they get all this education and then, but they really don't know the job and they don't really do a good job. And that was basically him telling me, this was not a guy who had a degree, but he was basically telling me, I don't care who you are. I don't care what you think you know. This was my attitude. And so I actually appreciated that because I'd rather know how you feel
where you
up front,
stand. Yep.
and this way I can figure out how to navigate instead of having somebody, smiling in my face and
Fake
acting,
and phony. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but again, it was one of those things, that I learned growing up in school with different people with different privileges. And no matter what, you have these microaggressions or sometimes just outright aggressions. And I thought that was a situation that wasn't a microaggression. That was kind of an outright aggression in my opinion. But it's one of those things that you always deal with, no matter what. So even though I busted my butt going to school and working full time and getting my undergraduate degree and working full time and getting my business degree, doing a great job on my job and just trying to do the best that I can. And then I get confronted with this guy who has this attitude and obviously felt that he had the right to say what he did to my face. And I was like, wow, but that's just some of the examples that I had. But notwithstanding that, Alex, I mean, I had a great experience at the Fed. I feel like I grew up there. I learned a lot, and it actually set the stage for me to enhance my career when I moved over to Key.
So would you say that was your first leadership role when you started at the Fed?
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
First leadership role, formal leadership role at the Fed. Yep, absolutely. And the other thing that I'll mention about the Fed, and this is what I learned from my mentor, because he introduced me to other people at the bank, and he's the one who told me that if you really want to develop leadership skills, you may find some opportunity working here, but your best bet is going to be being involved in community activities. And so he actually introduced me to a couple nonprofits, and that's actually how I started what I call my civic career. And it was because of him. At his urging, he said, this is what you need to do. And one organization, he just said, you're going to join this committee. Here's the meeting schedule. And he didn't ask me if I wanted to do it. He didn't ask me if I was interested. He just said, this is what you're going to do, because he was on the board of that organization. And so that was him training me up
Wow.
and sort of putting me in this situation. And so, these are all things that have kind of helped shape my perspectives today.
I always feel like there's a reason, like God puts you in a place for a reason. Like me and Alex and I are doing this podcast to set us up for something greater. So I always feel like where you're at, like you said, you felt like that set you up for your next part in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of feel like wherever you are, you're there for a reason. And I remember I tried to leave a certain job just because I didn't want to be there. And my wife would say, "It ain't time for you to leave yet." And she was right. It was setting me up for the next part. So
Mhm.
to hear you say that, to really to speak that, is true. Go ahead, Alex.
Now you mentioned mentors,
Yes.
and I'm curious. Well, first off, I would like for you to, since you've been in your career for as long as you have, the audience kind of enlighten them on the importance of having a mentor early on.
Okay. So so there's three people that we all need to find, and we have them in some way, shape, or form. We have a mentor, we have an advocate, and we have a sponsor. Sometimes the advocate and sponsor are going to be the same person, but they all play three different roles. The
Okay.
mentor is somebody that you sit down, you talk to, that's going to give you some advice, give you perspective, you know, talk about their experience, help you think through scenarios, situations, and help you in your decision-making process. That's the job of a mentor. And the mentor can be somebody that's on the job or somebody that's not on your job, but just somebody that knows you and has particular knowledge that can be helpful and help guide you along. And it's important for us to have people in our lives that can mentor us. And those people don't necessarily, like I said, they don't have to be people that you work with that work at your company. Sometimes it's better to have somebody who doesn't work at the company because then they can be, really objective. So that's the mentor. The advocate is, and this is where I think my mentor at the Fed, he was really an advocate for me and in some respects a sponsor. So he was more than a mentor because he actually made things happen. But the advocate is going to be somebody who is talking about you when you're not around. So when you are, when someone's saying, someone is leaving the bank and there's going to be a leadership opportunity, who's around? Who should we be talking to? Who should we be looking at? The advocate's going to be the one that say, you know what, it's, Alex has done these great things, Willie's done these wonderful things, think about them. And you don't even know about that conversation, okay? And so you want to make sure you have advocates. Those are people who they really do know you well. They know you well enough to know your aptitudes, your abilities, and those are the ones who also understand a little bit of who to talk to, like what the political landscape is going to be like in your organization. And then the sponsor is going to be the person to actually make it happen. So the sponsor might be the executive who says, you know what, I know this is a stretch assignment for Ron, and that's what happened to me when I was, at the Fed. Particularly in my last role, it was a stretch assignment. So, but they said, you know what, we have faith. We think Ron can do it. We're going to put him in this role. We're going to give him the support to be successful, and that's what a sponsor does. And so, sometimes, very often, those are different people that play those different roles, but those are the different roles that hopefully we can all develop in our career.
For the audience, before we go forward, just break, what's the three again? You don't have to break them down, but just give us the three
It's
again.
the mentor,
Mm-hmm.
the advocate, and the sponsor.
All right.
Hmm. Wow. Awesome. And so now we're towards the end of your time at the Fed.
Mm-hmm.
You transition over to Keybank. Tell us what that was like. After 10 years in a place, you moved up, up, and up, and then you transitioned basically into a completely new environment.
Okay. So when I was at the Federal Reserve, there were a couple of people that used to work there that eventually moved over to Key. And, Key was one of my customers, if you will. And so they kind of knew me already. They had actually been encouraging me to come over to Key for a long time. But I was actually pretty happy at the Fed. I was, getting good career growth and didn't really feel like I had a reason to leave. So I mentioned to you earlier during the podcast podcast that there was a point in time when I decided I wanted to go to law school.
Right.
And the way I financed, most of my education was through tuition reimbursement. So I asked the Federal Reserve. An opportunity came up at Key, and I knew the hiring manager because I'd worked with him. And it was funny because even though we knew each other, I wasn't someone he actually considered. The only reason why he considered me is because I had an MBA, which I thought was interesting, and we can talk about that in a moment.
Okay.
And that's the importance of having a credential, even though the credential doesn't necessarily equate to your ability. But in any event, I had this opportunity to go to Key. It was a leadership position. It was more money, and I had asked when I was interviewing, I said, well, I want to go to law school. Can Keybank help me with that? And the answer was yes. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. So I went back to, my superiors at the Fed, and I said, hey, I've got this great opportunity to go to Key. Here's, what they offered me. I didn't tell them, the amounts, but I told them, I said, they're going to pay me more money. I'm going to get this title, and they're going to help fund my law school education. I said, but to be honest with you, I'd rather stay here at the Fed. I really like working here. I'm not asking for more money. All I really want is for the Fed to help me with law school. Because the message that I got up to that point was, we don't pay for law school. Well, that wasn't entirely true because I happen to know some people who did get law school covered, but the Fed didn't want to do it for me. And so they said, no thanks, good luck. And so that's what, prompted me to move over to Key, is because that's something that I really, really wanted to do. And, Key has been great to me, by the way. I've been there for over 20 years now, 21 years. But in the first 6 months, they went through this organizational change, and, 3 of the people that I knew lost their jobs, and I was like, oh snap, what happened? What did I do? I had a relatively stable job at the Fed, and here I came over to Key, and I thought didn't think I was gonna last because of that. But ultimately, I had a great career. And the nice thing about coming over to Key in that environment was they knew I was going to law school. I went to night school 4 years, part-time. And so they knew that I had aspirations to do something else. And so that really helped frame and set things up for me so that when I was talking to my leadership about what do I want to do next, what does the next thing look like for me, there was no expectation that I was going to remain in that job, for a long time. And so the lesson that I learned there is that when I look at people and how they move around in the company and at other companies, oftentimes they get a job, they get an opportunity, and there's sort of this expectation that you're going to do it for a few years because you're learning some new skills, because they're training you up and preparing you for something different. And there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of times, for some of us, we think we get into a job and we feel like, we got to be in the job for 10 years before we can do something different. And that's just not the case. It really is about communication and trying to figure out what your path is so that you can set the expectation properly. The other thing it does, at least what it does for me, is if I know I'm on a timetable, that means, I'm not going to procrastinate, right? I'm going to, I know what objectives I'm trying to achieve. And so I'm going to work to achieve those objectives so I can meet whatever that timetable is. But the timetable is not absolute, right? So just because you think you're only going to be in a job for 2 or 3 years, sometimes you're in there a little bit longer. So don't take that to heart that it's an absolute time frame. But what it does help, at least what it's done for me, is really help keep me focused on where I want to go next.
Now, Ron, real quick before we go on, how are you doing on time?
I'm fine.
You good on time? Okay,
I'm
great.
good on time.
So You mentioned two things that I want to delve into. The first thing is you went to Keybank with an agenda for them to pay for your law school education,
Hmm.
and I think,
which was awesome.
yeah, no, that's awesome.
That's
But
next level thinking, man.
Thank
and I
you.
think that there are a lot of people that don't realize the opportunities that exist within companies to help you, not just as far as I'm going to pay you for this job, but to help you further your career.
Hmm.
And so kind of talk about that, especially the young Black men and women who might not know that there's an abundance of opportunities that exist within companies to help advance them in their career, whether they stay there or not, but and
Right.
how to make the most of it.
Yeah. So here's what I've learned. So a lot of times, people are out looking for a job, and it's quid pro quo. I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna give you my time doing this, and you're gonna pay me X. And so that seems to be the relationship. But the way I think about things and the way I encourage people to think about this is, let's talk about what's the investment that your company is going to make in you as an employee. Because when it costs companies money to bring employees in, to onboard people, they have to train you. Um, Obviously there's the hard costs of salary and benefits and all of those things, but they got to give you equipment, they've got to train you, they've got to do all these things. And so no company really wants there to be a whole lot of turnover. Some companies are better suited for it. They expect higher turnover, retail organizations, that sort of thing. But once you get into the corporate office, it's a little bit different. So, and I learned that at the Fed, and that's why I even thought to even ask the question when I was talking to KeyBank, because the honest God's truth is I wasn't really looking to leave. I was perfectly happy, and I entertained the opportunity because at the urging of people that I knew, and I said, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, if there's a better opportunity, nobody should be mad at others for wanting to pursue a better opportunity. And so, you know, um, so I asked that question. And so when we are in our careers, that's the question we need to be asking. So the conversations we should be having with our leadership is really about, okay, what do we want to learn and get out of our experience at the company? There's nothing wrong with doing a job and wanting to be the expert and stay in that job for a long time. But some people, they are ambitious. They want to do something different, and there's nothing wrong with having a conversation with your leadership that says, hey, I really like this area and I want to prepare to be in that area. What can I do to kind of build the right skills in order to do that? How can you help me do that? Like, what's
Mm-hmm.
the development plan? Are there training programs that I can participate in? Sometimes companies offer training programs. Sometimes they pay for training programs outside the company to help you do that. These are all investments that they're making in you. And if a company is willing to make those types of investments, then that means that they want you to stick around. So when I think about what KeyBank did, they said, okay, we want this guy to come in to help manage an electronic payment operation. That was the job that I came to Key to do. But he's talking about law school. You don't need a law degree to do that. They could have said, no, we don't, we're not going to help you with law school because we need you for this job. That's the reason why we're hiring you. But they said, no, we're going to do this. This is what he's asking for. We can do it. Not on the promise that they were going to be able to move me into a different role, because they can't, you can't foresee the future. But it was an investment that they were willing to make. Fortunately, I was able to move into our law department after I graduated law school. So I was actually able to make that transition. But the fact that Key was willing to make that investment and make that commitment to me, that really resonated with me. And that's, it's those types of commitments that have allowed me to stay there for as long as I have, because that's just one example. There've been other things that they've done over the years to really help me, progress and grow. And so that's really the conversation that I would encourage people to have.
It's funny because I was always once the shy person that was scared to ask the company for something, that was scared to, because the fear of rejection. But
Hmm.
once I got older and I got, the worst they can say is no. And
Exactly.
so and a lot of people say that, but once you really get that mindset, like, all right, listen, like literally the quote, a closed mouth don't get fed, is so true.
That's right.
You'll be stuck in the same position for years and miserable,
Yep.
unhappy, all because of the fear of rejection.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I've watched people I've watched people complain about stuff and they get what they want. I watch people, so there's a way to do it. And, obviously, as in my opinion anyway, I shouldn't say obviously, in my opinion, being Black professionals, we have to be a little bit more nuanced and savvy sometimes in order to do that. But you're absolutely right, Willie. No one can navigate your career but you. And what people really want to see, like the leadership skill that people really want to see, is the confidence and the forethought of leadership. And if you're able to have those conversations, about where you want to go next, um, to me that helps. So every time, so when I meet with my my leadership during my one-on-one discussions, and we have regular one-on-one discussions. I don't wait for performance review time to have these conversations. They know, each one knows what I want to do next. And I talk to them, hey, I've been thinking about this and I've been thinking about that. Here's an area of the bank that I don't know that I want to learn. What can I do to learn that? And 9 times out of 10, we're able to find a way for me to do it, and then that kind of helps in my trajectory at the company. So we can't be shy, because the one mistake that we would have is that somebody's looking at your performance and saying, okay, you're ready for the next move. No one is really doing that. I mean, sometimes it happens. It happens sometimes. I mean, it has happened to me in my career, but it doesn't happen all the time. We have to be the masters of our destiny.
So it's 2020 right now, and
Hmm.
we're in the midst of I guess you could call it a financial crises. Unemployment rates are at one of an all-time high.
Hmm.
What would you say to those who think that there are no opportunities out there right now, and that you know you got people actually, and I'm sure you know this, who would rather stay at home, get an
And
unemployment
collect the
check,
unemployment check.
Hmm.
opposed to getting up and getting their butt to work. But just listening to you, uh, the perspective that I'm getting is that there are an abundance of opportunities, and if you ask, you shall receive. So, what would you say to anybody listening who may think that there are no opportunities, that the world is about to go up in flames? What would you say to them?
So, I think so. I tend to be, a glass half full kind of person. I'm always generally optimistic, and times are tough. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, unemployment is high because of the pandemic. There are a lot of businesses that either are shuttered or operating at less than capacity. So, I mean, it is rough. But having said that, I do believe there are opportunities. And for some people, for some of us, this really is an opportunity to kind of reflect, because sometimes, life forces us uh, into a decision, and maybe forces us to move in a direction that we were reluctant to go. One thing I'll say is this: I mean, you have to have faith. You have to have faith, in 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 the Lord. You have to have faith in your circumstance. You have to have faith in yourself, and you have to think positively. For those people who are, thinking that they want to take whatever is handed to them. My attitude is this: if you're willing to give me $600 a month, I mean, that's what you're willing to give me. If I would have asked or demand more, I could probably get more, right? Because no one's going to give you your fair share of anything, right? They're not going to say, you know what, Alex, I think you're worth this. I'm just going to go ahead and give it to you because I think you're worth that. No,
Right.
they're going to give you a number, and it'll be up to you to say, am I worth this or not? Will I accept this or not? And so $600 is not, I mean, it's hard to build off of $600, a week or a month or whatever the benefit is. We really do have to figure out how to make our own way. But what we also have to learn to do is we have to pay attention to the environment and know what's going on, because a lot of times it's about timing. So I never knew when my next opportunity was going to come up. Like, that's not projected. No one's going to tell me, okay, Ron, do this job for 3 years, and then in 3 years we're going to have something else for you. That's not what it's about. It's about being prepared, because we know something is going to happen at some point in time. And if I'm paying attention, I'm watching things. I'm watching retirements. I'm watching organizational change. I'm watching the business change, our strategic focus. I want to be prepared for when that next opportunity comes. And that's what, what I've been doing for myself is making sure that I'm prepared. And that would be my advice for all of us, is to really be prepared. But that means we have to pay attention. And sometimes we just don't pay attention to really what's going on. We just kind of are in our own mode because we have our family situation, we got our job, we're dealing with stress and other things. But somehow, if you're not paying attention to what's going on, then you're not even able to predict when an opportunity is going to arise. And if you can't predict when an opportunity arises, then how can you prepare yourself for that opportunity when it does? Wow. I know that's kind of a long-winded way of answering the question, but hopefully that was responsive.
Yeah, it was.
I am really like Ron Johnson. I'm really enjoying this. The most unique thing about your story is you came from so many different backgrounds. You said you grew up, you spent a little time in the projects, then you went to Shaker Heights, and then you worked at the law firm, then you went to Keybank. It's like your story can relate to definitely as being like Black men. I cannot wait till this podcast drops for the viewers can see this and understand your story, because you've come from different parts of life. So with that being said, do you feel like where you're at right now, do you feel like you still have more? Like, I'm sure you do, but what do you feel like it's the next level for you? Like, what is something right now that you think, like, you don't have to, if you don't want to share it, you don't have to, but what is something now that you like, you know what, I got more, like, this is what I'm working on. Like, what is something that you can share with us that you feel like you still haven't accomplished, or you still have more to prove?
Well, I do feel like I have more to offer. I just turned 50, a couple months ago. So I'm 50
Happy
years old.
birthday.
Hey, belated.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So, I got a little bit more runway before, I'm ready to retire. There's more that I want to do. Hopefully there'll be some opportunities that come along the way. I do have when I think about retirement, I mean, I still got a ways to go, but I am thinking about retirement. And so I'm thinking about that number, what number do I need to reach before I feel comfortable, retiring? So I'm thinking about that, and then thinking about, how to achieve that. I'm thinking about what I want to do after I retire. I mean, I'm not one to just, sit around and.
I promise. I was just about to say that you don't seem like the person to just sit back. You seem like you have to be like involved in doing something. So it's funny to say that.
So I'm going to do something, right? But I mean, I got a little bit of time to think about it, but part of my retirement plan is, what is that thing that I want to do? And then what do I need to, how do I prepare myself for that? So to me, this is all goes into this mindset that I have about thinking about the future and doing my best to plan for it. So, that's the best that I can say, right now. Um, like I said, I've been blessed to, be where I am, um, with the bank, and, he's been very good to me, and hopefully I've been, good to the bank, and I'll be at least continuing in that regard for quite some time.
And speaking of being active, you've held a number of positions with Key before you took on the title of Chief Ethics Officer.
Mhm.
And you also sit on a number of boards and are active in philanthropy.
Yes.
So kind of tell us how you got involved with that, and what is your overall goal, and perhaps some advice for those who might want to go that route.
Okay. So I guess so. I mentioned the mentor that I had at the Federal Reserve and how he kind of got me involved in community service and community engagement, and the value proposition. Well, aside from basically telling me to serve on this one committee, the value proposition was, this is part of your leadership development. He basically said, not so many words, you have skills and talent. You're going to grow those skills and talent here at the Fed. You need to apply those to the community. And, that's what he did. The people that he introduced me to, that's what they did. And so I kind of built this thing out. And this is the term that I can't remember if he told me this term or if somebody else told me this term, but he said, you want to build a civic profile. And I actually have two resumes. I have a professional resume, then I have what I call my civic resume. So the civic resume, just like a professional resume, shows your progression in your career, the different jobs that you've done, your progression, the skills that you've developed. The same thing happens in the community. So, you start off as a committee member on a nonprofit organization. Then maybe you get invited to sit on the board, and then you join a board committee, and then maybe you become a committee chair, and the skills that you learn. So aside from helping an organization fulfill its mission, and maybe even feeling good about your contribution to the organization, you learn how to strategize, you learn how to influence decisions. Because as a board member, unless it's an organization that has no staff and the board is doing all the work, you're influencing decisions. If the organization has staff, you're providing direction, you're learning, how do they do things, how do they fundraise, with all the different things that they do. And so those are skills that you can actually put on your resume for career growth. Those are leadership skills, being able to influence, being able to develop strategy. All of those things are leadership skills. Those are the same skills that what you would apply, in your company, but you're learning them during the civic track. So that's something that I learned from my mentor, and that's something that I've done. There was an organization in Cleveland called the Cleveland Leadership Center. They have a number of leadership development programs. There's Leadership Cleveland, there's Cleveland Bridge Builders, Cleveland, and each of these programs targets individuals. Some target high school students, some target emerging leaders, some target senior leaders at corporations. I was in the Cleveland Bridge Builders program, and it was a great program. It's 9 months. My company paid for it. I asked them to, again, part of that investment. This is something I want to do to develop. Will Keybank support it? And the answer was yes. So they paid for it. And so I went through that program, and that was back in 2006, so it was a while ago. But from that program, um, when Frank Jackson first became mayor, um, he had this project. He called it the Operational Efficiency Task Force. And when he came into City Hall, he wanted to take a look at, the Cleveland City Hall operations and make some recommendations to make them better. And so he asked for volunteers from the community to participate in this project. And he went specifically to the Cleveland Leadership Center, and he asked for volunteers. And I volunteered for it. And so I worked for about 10 months with another group of volunteers looking at a particular function within City Hall, met a lot of people, conducted some interviews. I mean, it was a lot of work, right? But I led that team of volunteers. And when it was all said and done, we made our recommendations and, that sort of thing. Fast forward, they were looking for someone to join the board of the Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority. And I was on the radar because of that project. And so I was appointed to that board, and then I became the chair of that board. And I became chair of that board. So I don't know if you remember, a while ago when we had the scandals in Cuyahoga County, and there were a lot of people. So,
Remember that?
we were implicated in that. And so, we had a person on, the CEO at the time was implicated in that. So I'm the chairman of the board of this organization, public organization, crisis situation. And, we had to navigate. We had to make some changes. We had to do some things. And I was able to do that. We had a great board, great council, the CMHA staff, wonderful to work with. But those are skills, that's a skill set, leading a major organization in the city that's an opportunity I would not have had at Key. And so that's, again, part of the civic profile, and so I learned a lot in that type of a role. And so, but I wouldn't have gotten there if I hadn't started building a community profile earlier in the career. And so this is an example of how, if you do get involved in the right things and you develop them the right way, that they can also create these types of opportunities, going forward.
Okay, so you mentioned the word community, and I want to talk about the community and the school systems with you.
Mm-hmm.
So Alex and I had a podcast earlier in the week, and we talked about things if we could change. And I said I think trades should be back in high school, because everyone's not college ready when they graduate high school. So I feel like to have those classes where you learning welding, you learning how to run a CNC machine, being a carpenter, a plumber, those are trades that will always be, they're always needed. I look at guys, I work in a warehouse, and there's guys 60, 70 years old still running CNC machines, still welding. And I feel like the school system failed by taking those out, because that's a trade you can have where you graduate, you take in high school, you graduate, you go to a company, hey, I'm already certified, I've been trained, you can train me your way you want me to do at your job. But that's something I feel like, because again, everyone's not college ready when they graduate high school. So, and some people may jump and go to college knowing, and they're not ready, and then you put yourself in debt because you went and you wasn't ready. And so what would you say do you think needs to be changed, like as far as the school systems?
So first of all, Willie, I agree with you. I do feel like the school systems generally sort of miss the boat when they're kind of putting everyone on a college prep path. Now, I will say that, when I look at the probability of being able to um, make the moves that are where you're able to take care of yourself and take care of your family and kind of build for the future, there's a higher probability, in my opinion, for people who go to college, complete their college degree and kind of matriculate that way. But everyone's path is not the same. So it's wrongheaded to suggest that that's the only way for everybody. Where I think the schools have missed it. So the nice thing about trades is when you know something, like nobody can take it from you. And to your point, there's always going to be a need for skilled labor, skilled tradespeople, right? There's always going to be the need there. But where I think the schools have missed the boat is what we really need to be doing is we need to be teaching people about entrepreneurship and what that really means. Because um, the reality is the vast majority of businesses in this country are small business. They're small businesses, less than 15 employees. And so learning a trade is great to know how to run the CNC machine and becoming a glazier, plumbers, all of those things. And everybody's, not necessarily, interested in being entrepreneurs, but there are certain skills that you learn as an entrepreneur that can be beneficial, whether you're working for someone or not. Things like, how do you sell a service or a product? How do you, connect with clients? How do you um, understand the competition, in that particular case or in that particular industry? These are things that when you're an entrepreneur, you're kind of forced to pay attention to the things around you so that you can better respond. And those are the skills that I think schools really need to focus on. And we need to start teaching our young people that early. I'm talking like 5th and 6th grade early, not just high school. I actually feel like this type of education needs to start a lot younger. But I mean, when I was, again, 1,000 years ago, when I was in junior high, we had shop class, right? We learned, about things that they don't offer
The
today.
workshop, my dad and my uncle will always talk about, like, they had workshop.
Right. Yeah. And so, so you learn how to do those things, and those are important skills to learn. And those schools don't offer that. So I do feel like our school system is failing the kids because we're not as well rounded as we used to be. But I'm also reminded of this, and again, this is just my own personal opinion, so others may have a different view. But the schools really are the school system is really designed to create a workforce for the future. And so,
Yep, I
back
agree.
then, right? So back then, you learn trades because a college degree wasn't as prevalent, it wasn't as necessary. The jobs that were going to be available for graduating seniors was different. They were different. They required different skills, and so the curriculum was kind of designed to create that workforce. The workforce today, um, you know, the students today are being trained for a different workforce for the future. So that's just something that I think we have to keep in mind. And so I'm not, again, I know it's a long-winded way to
Oh no,
answer the
it's fine.
question, but that's kind of how I view things.
And I had one more, then I'm gonna hush my mouth and let my partner take over because I'll be going. It was
No, you're fine, bro.
it was something else I had brought up. Well, actually, I'm still in Alex. Alex brought this up, and I'm gonna add mine to it. And I think a great idea he said was, I think we should start teaching our children how to manage money and how to get their credit right in school. You shouldn't learn how to manage money and how to build your credit at the age of what, 20, 25. That's
Right.
something that should be taught in school also.
I Yeah, I actually agree with that wholeheartedly. So I've always had a job. I've always worked. since I was 12. So it was either a paper route back in the days when children could have paper routes. They can't have paper routes anymore. Or, I actually, in 7th and 8th grade summers, I actually had a little side hustle, summer hustle. I would clean out garages and mow lawns and in my neighborhood, but I didn't have the capacity to do all that work. So I got a couple of my friends to actually, I would book the work, and I would send them to actually do the work, and then I would pay them.
You know what's so funny about that is I remember hearing Puffy say that was one of his first jobs where he actually had a paper route because he wanted new clothes and his mother didn't have the money to buy them, so he hired kids from the neighborhood to deliver the papers for him, and he paid them, and then he took the rest of the profits.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna tell you this story, and if you can, don't edit this story out, but I got to share this story. So I had one summer, I made, I think, almost $1,000. That summer cleaning out garages. Okay.
Hmm.
This is in and around Shaker Square. Okay. And so I had three kids that were doing the work. One of them was a Jewish kid. Okay. One of my classmates.
Now that's rare.
No, so here's the story. So and it's like I said, I would go out, I get the jobs, I get the money, and then I would pay these kids. And of course, I kept a little bit for myself, and I wasn't greedy. But this Jewish kid, he apparently he did the job, did several jobs, went home, and he was really, really happy because he made some money. He had a job. He told his father, and his father got mad. And his father came and talked to my father, my parents about it, because he felt that I was exploiting his kid. And so edit this part out, but ironic because, I mean, this was a kid of privilege. And I forget what his family did. Like, I don't know what his parents did for a living, but they had a really big house, right? I mean, much bigger house than what we lived in. They were from privilege, but I think it was because he was mad because his son
He was
wasn't
working for a
doing.
black man.
Right. His son didn't come up with the idea. He was working for me. And so, but I had the paper route. I had the jobs. And the reason why I bring that up is because my mom, she told me, because I would want these different clothes and different shoes and stuff like that. And she told me, she said, well, you got money. So if you want it, then you can buy it. And what I ended up doing is when I would make my little money and I realized, how much I had, I didn't want to spend all my money on, a pair of shoes or, a particular pair of jeans or whatever. And I actually became a little bit more frugal when it came to spending money, because now that I had it, I wanted to keep as much of it as I could. I mean, I still wanted to have things, but I didn't want to blow everything. And so, to your question, Willie, about teaching young kids early, that's exactly what I think we need to teach our kids. So one of my sons, the conversation I had with him a few years ago, because a lot of these kids are, they just labeled junkies, right? And they got these the AirPods. They want the latest iPhone. The iPhones cost $1,200, and I don't even know how much the iPods cost, but at least $300.
Like
right?
$300, yeah.
And they want the sneakers, and they want all that stuff. And he's, Isaiah at the time, he's probably 15 or 16, and he wants all this expensive stuff. I said, but you ain't got no job, right? I mean, you're not working. And you want all this stuff. I got a good job, and I don't want to spend $300 on a pair of, earbuds. Like I can get something cheaper, you know. And so we kind of had this conversation, and I don't know if you want to edit this part out too, but I told him,
I'm
I
loving
said,
all of this.
I just told him, I said, and I apologize for the language here. I said, I'm gonna tell you about this thing called ghetto rich. Let me tell you what that means, right? You want all this stuff so you can walk around and make people think you have something that you don't. Like, who cares what kind of phone you have, right? You don't even pay the bill.
Mhm.
So why do you have to have, the Jordans? And he's a sneakerhead too, by the way. So you're a sneakerhead. You want the
So is
iPhone.
Willie.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with it if you
That's
can
not
do
true.
it. But there's nothing wrong with it. But if you can do it, the point is that if you have your own, spend your money however you want. But if you don't have it and you get a little bit of money, because for him, he give him $1, it burns the hole right through his pocket,
Mhm.
right? He never has any money because as soon as he gets $1, his birthday, Christmas, whatever, he's always spending it on something, and then he never has enough, so then he has to get money from somebody else to supplement it. But then his brother, and again, these are triplets, so they're the same age. His brother, he don't spend money on nothing. He holds on to money. He's got the same phone that he's been using for the past 6 years. And you
Wow.
ask him, do you want a new phone? No, I don't need a new phone. It's the mindset. And that's the
Wow.
mindset that, young people need to hear.
I'm letting my 9-year-old hear that because he's one where my wife and I, we just started to trying to pretty much get him into the managing money and valuing money. So we'll give him something and immediately he'll want to, Dad, can I go buy, it's the game Fortnite, and he wants to buy a card. And I would tell him, I'm like, yo, if you stack up your money, your chore money, you'll be able to get that instead of in the store. Because the thing is, in the store, you get so much money, I don't let him sit on it, because what he'll do, he'll be like, hey, Dad, can you buy this for me? Hey, Dad, can you buy that for me? It was like, no, what happened to the money you've been saving up?
Right, right.
Mm,
Yeah.
But he's like, well, when you gave me that $5 or whatever I spent, I'm like, well, guess what? If you had saved that and added it to what Mom and I gave you now, you would have enough money to get that and have some left over. So just at 9, trying to change his mind to like, because he's another one. Dad, I want Kyrie's. Dad, I want these headphones. I want a hoverboard. Like, yo, bro, you're
Right.
not even
But
working, man.
And
but
right,
but
and
but
that, yeah, and that's exactly right. But see, the thing is, I've always told my children, I said, you can spend your money however you want, right? But just think about what you're going to want down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
so, so if you spend your $50 now to get your PS4 card for this one game that you're gonna play for a weekend, you're gonna master the game, and you're not gonna play it again, and you know that another game is gonna come out 6 weeks from now, and you're not gonna have the $50, where you could have been saving it. I just always tell them to kind of try to think ahead.
Yep.
It's a hard thing in this day and age, in my opinion, because of Instagram and social media, where people are kind of posting up their what they have, but I don't know how to battle it, because it's a perennial fight that I think all parents have. I'm pretty sure our parents, when we were their age, were battling the similar thing with a different front. But
Yep.
that's what these young people need to learn.
It's ironic you said that, because I'm currently reading a book called The Wealth Choice,
Hmm.
and he talks about that. He talks to say, there's a difference between being rich versus looking rich, and
Right.
most people, they want to look rich. They want to drive the Mercedes, wear the expensive clothes. In fact, I'll never forget. I would think I was on Facebook one day, and I saw a video of a guy, a young black guy. He was a financial advisor at a firm. I can't remember the name of the firm, but he told this story. He said, I remember when I first started at the firm, there was this young black couple, and they came in, and he said they were pieced down to the nines, dressed real sharp. They looked like money. And so in his mind, he's thinking, I know they got a lot of money. And
Hmm.
when he opened up the books and looked at their accounts, it was dry as the Sahara Desert.
That's right. Yeah.
But then there was a white couple, and I hate to use this in terms of race, but it is happens far too often, especially with our people. He says a white couple, and they look like they might be homeless.
Mhm.
And he said when he opened up their books, millions of dollars in
Wow.
cash,
Right.
millions in
Yeah.
cash. And ironically, over the years, I've actually gotten to know people like that from my career in real estate. I'm talking about people who could wire $500,000 today.
Hmm.
But looking at them, you would never know that versus us. We want to have the watches, like you said, we want to have the latest everything. But when you look at our assets versus liabilities, it's a complete dichotomy. Whereas what we've been doing, appreciate versus up. So yeah, it's a mindset.
It's a
And
mindset.
yeah, and so I first off, I want to thank you again for this. I feel like we're gonna have to do another episode because I really want to dig into philanthropy.
Okay.
And I know you sit on a host of boards, and I
Mhm.
really want to kind of focus on that. But I want to segue from what we just talked about into this last question. Uh, in fact, it's a two-part question. The first part is, what opportunities do you see now and for the future for the next generation?
Mhm.
As well as this, if you could not leave anything to your children except wisdom and a set of principles, what would that be? So
That's a
the
great question, bro.
That's a
the
great question.
first part is, what opportunities do you see now and for the future for youth? And the second part is, if you couldn't leave anything to your children except wisdom and a set of principles,
Okay.
what would that be?
All right. Whew. Yeah. So Alec, yeah, you throw some heavy ones out there. So I think for the first question, the opportunities for the next generation, a couple of things that I see that I like, um, is I do feel like um, the next generation of leaders, community leaders, business leaders, political leaders, I do feel like this sense of apathy is sort of dissipating. So one thing that I've kind of believed is that people just don't care anymore, right? They don't care about anything. They don't pay attention to what's going on. They don't care. And not to get political, but the last 4 years is an example of that. Actually, the last 6 years, on how we ended up with the president that we ended up. To me, that's a perfect example of apathy. Like people just didn't really care. Otherwise, they would have never let that happen in the first place.
Mm.
And the leadership development program that I mentioned, I'm still involved with that program.
Okay.
I help. I co-chair the committee that selects each class. I've been doing that ever since I've been a part of the program. So I see people that are interested in becoming civic leaders. They're passionate about different causes, and it doesn't really matter what the cause is to me. Like I don't care if your cause is animal rights or women's rights or whatever. It doesn't matter as long as you're passionate about something. Because if you're passionate about something, that means you're not apathetic, and that means you want to do something about it. And so I feel very optimistic that this next generation are people that care about stuff, and they're going to get stuff done. The thing that I think about, I won't say worry about. I just want to make sure that people are prepared to be great and do the great things that they are passionate about. And this is where I feel like, I'm becoming an old man, right? Because old people always say, young people don't know nothing, they ain't ready for nothing, blah, blah, blah. And that's unfair. That's not true, right? Sometimes old people need to get out the way and let young people do their thing. but where there is some truth to it is sometimes, we don't have to go hard at everything. And I think that's kind of where we are with society, is we kind of go hard with this. We have these extremes. We're so polarized. We're so bilateral now. Everything is so polarized. I think we need to learn a little bit more nuance and compromise and things of that nature. And I think there's a way to do it without losing passion. But so I think so in terms of opportunity, I do feel like more and more there's going to be more and more entrepreneurs, whether they're business entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs. I hear all the time about nonprofits that are starting up, or community causes that are starting up all the time, and that's because of, again, that passion that I think people feel. So I do feel like life is going to look different in this next generation, and I also feel like with social media and we're doing this podcast, so we're having a conversation, but we're in 3 different locations, and people are used to that now. That wasn't the case before. That's going to change how we interact, and so I do feel like feel very optimistic about what the future holds there. So hopefully that answers that question. On the second question, in terms of what values, what's that value legacy that I would leave to my children? I do believe in philanthropy, and I do believe that what I want leave my children with is the sense of a sense of responsibility to community, whatever that community is. So what I see in some young people, and I'm thinking about my own children. I see, for some people, I see some selfishness, quite frankly, where they don't think about anybody but themselves. They don't care about anybody but themselves. Hopefully that's a sign of maturity, and they'll grow out of that. But I do feel like we have a responsibility to our community to do something, and that doesn't mean you can save everybody. Doesn't mean that you got to be a bleeding heart, but you have to have a heart. So that's one thing. And then the other legacy is really about philanthropy. So one of my goals in the near future, which is the next 2 to 3 years, is I want to create a fund, a donor advised fund, and we can talk about this more when we do the next podcast, where we deposit money into that fund, and the donor advised fund is set up. You invest it, you grow it, and then you donate proceeds to nonprofit organizations.
That's a great idea.
Man,
and I want to set it
yes.
up. I want to work with my children, and one in particular who I think really would really have fun with this, because once you have money that you can actually give out, it actually, in my opinion, it causes you to think about things a little bit differently, because there's so many causes out there. There's so many things that you can support. So then you begin to pay attention. You begin to look at things. And so if we can take this fund and grow it and be able to donate money, then I can say to my children, the fund is yours. So the fund is, now you can figure out that you can only make a charitable contribution. So you can't use the money for any other purpose other than for charitable giving. But pick what you want. So what cause do you want to support this year? And to me, that will help with the first part of that, which is having a heart and being able to use and leverage those financial resources in order to help the community. So those would probably be the 2 biggest things. And then the last thing really is this: I've never been one to force to force my kids to make certain decisions. I mean, as a parent, sometimes you got to lay down the law, especially when they're young, because they just don't know any better. What I've tried to do, and hopefully I've done a decent job of this, is not tell them what to do, but teach them decision making. How do you make the right decision? Like, and I can think of examples where I did that well. I can think of examples where I needed to improve, how I did that. But I also feel like I've seen some progress, because at the end of the day, like my kids are 18, so they're 18. I can only tell them what to do as much as they'll listen to me, right? Is whatever influence I have. But once they fly the coop, they fly the coop, and then they have to live and die by their own decisions. And so then you want them to learn to take responsibility, learn how to assess a situation and make the right decision. And we're not always going to make the right decision, make the right choice. Sometimes things aren't going to work out in our favor. So then how do you recover from that? Because that's not going to be the end of the world. And so those would be things that, I'd like to make sure I leave my children.
Cannot wait to delve into that and more on the next episode. This has been exciting, man.
Man, the great Ron Johnson. Oh man.
See, now you sound like Anthony. But I appreciate you.
Listen.
I appreciate you.
That was, man. That was
probably just part one.
Man, that was probably
that was part one.
That was not even probably. That was the best episode. That, man, I've learned so much. You've inspired me. You've motivated me. I hope you've done the same to our viewers. And like Alex said, that was only part one. So this is the first time, but it definitely will not be the last time that you'll be on the podcast. Alex and I have a lot of topics that we've written down, and I know a few that I definitely would like to check with you to see if you would like to sit in and just join the conversation with it. We have a lot. It's like the crazy thing about this, we didn't even dig deep really into what we wanted to talk about with you.
Nah.
So,
I probably got another 150 questions that
That's
I
all.
wanted to ask.
Then you gonna go easy on me?
Right. Definitely, I'm gonna go easy on you. Well, before we wrap up, you have, I can tell you have served in the capacity of a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell that that's something that you take very serious. So what's one piece of wisdom, one piece of advice you would leave to our audience before we wrap up part one?
I think the biggest message is that now's the time to become the owner of your destiny, owner of your career.
Say that.
Owner of your destiny, owner of your career. Be thoughtful. Don't leave things to chance. Don't leave things to other people. And learn to be your own advocate. And there's certainly people out there that can help you in your journey. They understand what it means to be a mentor, an advocate, and a sponsor. And sometimes we feel bad. We don't want to ask people to help us because we don't want to seem like we don't know what we're doing, or we don't want to be a burden. But at the end of the day, this is how it's done. This is how the other folks do it. This is how we need to do it, and this is how we create that continuum so that we can all be successful. So that's what I'll leave for the viewers, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next episode, to part two, whenever that might be.
Listen, I usually end with a motivational speech for the viewers, but I'm not even going. I'm saying nothing
he
after
already
that.
Yeah, he already gave it. Well, I think that wraps up this episode. Ron Johnson, Chief Ethics Officer, Keybank. Ron, tell the people where they can find you at.
So you can find me at my LinkedIn. I'm Ronald V. Johnson Jr. On LinkedIn. And you can also send me an email at rvlikevictoryj.esq@gmail.com.
Perfect. You got anything else, Willie?
No, man, that's it. That was another. Oh my God, I'm so excited. That was a great episode.